Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about natural selection. And natural selection is a major way that evolution can occur. It's not the only way, but it is a super important way that we're going to be starting to think about evolution by thinking about it. So natural selection was popularized by Charles Darwin and his voyage to the Galapagos. And so here are some pictures of some different finches that have all been facing different sorts of selective pressures, been living in different environments, and then evolved different kinds of beaks to deal with their different environments. So we'll be going into, in this PowerPoint, what conditions need to be in place in order for natural selection to occur. Like I mentioned, natural selection is not the only way that evolution can happen. So one other way that you might be familiar with is artificial selection. So if we do something like breed dogs together to get specific to try to get dogs that are a particular size or look a particular way, that also would constitute evolution, but it's a different kind of evolution. It's artificial selection. So when we're thinking about what kinds of scenarios will lead to natural selection, we'll have to think about whether these four characteristics that we're going to be talking about are in play or not. So when you hear the phrase natural selection, I think a lot of people, maybe not you, you took ninth grade bio and I'm sure you remember everything, but I think a lot of people, if you were to ask this question on the street, might say it's survival of the fittest or something along those lines. And it's technically not incorrect when you take into account the biological meaning of the word fitness. But for our purposes, that's a little bit, it's not specific enough, and I think it gives people the wrong idea, because I think when you hear the phrase survival of the fittest, you start to think about the strongest individual surviving, or the fastest individual surviving and reproducing and passing those characteristics on. But in biology, fitness really just means whether one is able to have reproductive success, or whether you're able to pass your genes on to the next generation. And so when we're thinking about biological fitness, even really tiny or slow or other characteristics that you might not think of as being fit in the sort of ordinary English sense can still be biologically fit. So because of this, we're not going to use the phrase survival of the fittest. Instead, we are going to use a different phrase. And in this phrase, there are going to be the four elements that we need for natural selection to occur. And that phrase is heritable variation leads to differential reproductive success. And so you might be looking at this and thinking that I was getting a little too excited with my capitalization situation here, but I capitalized different letters for each of the four characteristics that we're going to be talking about. So this idea of heritability, this idea of variation, this leads to is capitalized because we need a sort of causality, and differential reproductive success, which, like I said, is this idea of fitness when we're using it in biology. Okay, so let's look at each of these one by one. So the first condition is that not all members of a population can survive and therefore reproduce to maximum potential. And this is another sort of problem with the survival of the fittest terminology. So survival only matters insofar as the longer an organism is surviving, the more likely it is to have offspring or have more offspring. So what we really care about for evolution and natural selection is this reproduction aspect. So survival is sort of a proxy for if you survive long enough to reach sexual maturity, then you're probably more likely to reproduce. But this is the part that matters. So not all members of a population can reproduce to maximum potential. And that's because you can imagine if you just had a population where everyone was having the maximum number of babies, the population would grow and grow and grow, but there wouldn't be any change in that population over time, which in essence is what evolution is: change in a population over time. So you wouldn't get change if the population was just expanding, but the proportions of different kinds of characteristics and traits were staying the same. So we need to have differential reproductive success. So this can be seen really clearly in certain examples, like certain kinds of birds. I forget the name of this exact one, but some birds will practice what's called siblicide. So they'll lay a number of eggs, let's say like 3, but all of the androgens will be concentrated in the first one or two. And then so when these eggs hatch, the third egg, which doesn't have as much of these hormones, is going to be attacked by one of the first egg and will die. So like in practice, one of the baby birds is going to die right away, and that lets the resources that are available to the birds be concentrated into the organisms, and then they're more likely to survive, as opposed to if the resources were being more spread out. This can also happen when food is really scarce in spotted hyena populations. So clearly, one of these baby birds is not going to have any reproductive success, whereas the other one or two would have reproductive success. Okay, so that's one condition. The second condition is that there has to be variation within a species in terms of their characteristics. And this variation can be physical, so something that you can see by looking at it, what we would call a phenotype, or it can be behavioral. So maybe if you're looking at these fish, you could say that some of them are slightly bigger and some are slightly smaller. Some might be a little darker, whereas others might be a little brighter. So those would all be visual things that you could see by looking at the fish, and that might affect how well they're able to be spotted by predators or how well they're able to camouflage. But you could also think about characteristics like how fast they're able to swim. So maybe some of these fish are faster swimmers than others, and that would also go into whether or not they're able to maybe catch food or whether they're able to escape from larger fish that want to eat them. So some sort of variation, be it visible or be it behavioral in characteristics. And then third, this variation, whatever variation we're thinking about, needs to be inherited. So you have to be able to pass it from a parent to the offspring. So here we're looking at a white polar bear that's evolved to blend in with its environment. So white polar bear fur enables it to blend in with the snow, and this probably lets it capture prey better than if it stood out more. And that white fur is passed on to baby polar bears. So if the white fur was advantageous, but baby polar bears were all different kinds of colors of fur, then that couldn't be a cause for natural selection, because we wouldn't be selecting for white fur in the parents, because even if that was helpful to the parent, it wouldn't help the offspring at all. So whatever variation we're thinking about, it needs to be able to be passed on. And then finally, our last condition is that the differences in reproduction and survival that we've been talking about have to be due to the variation among organisms. And what I mean by this is that if we're thinking about who's going to have reproductive success and who's not, the variation has to be the cause of it. So you can imagine, well, let's look at this example first. So we're looking at a population of beetles. Some of the beetles are green and some are brown. And it looks like the bird is able to see the green beetles more easily. Perhaps they're against like the bark of a tree or something, so the brown ones blend in better, or maybe they're in the dirt. So the birds are able to see the green beetles easier, and therefore they eat more green beetles. And then when you look at this population over time, you'll see that there's going to be more brown beetles than green beetles. So we're changing what the population looks like. We're getting an increase in the amount of brown beetles. So that would be evolution, change over time. And the change that we're seeing is due to the variation in color. So we're getting differential reproductive success. Brown beetles are being more successful, passing their genes on more, and it's because of their color. Just to put this in contrast with like what other things it could be because of, you could imagine random events. So if I was walking along this path and just stepped on half of these beetles randomly, then there would be differential success there, right? Like maybe just by chance, a lot of the green beetles survived and I crunched a lot of the brown ones. But that difference in survival and reproduction wouldn't be because of the traits of the organism. It would just be random. Like I just happened to step on a lot of the green ones. So if we're thinking about conditions for natural selection, this last one is sort of tying it all together. We need difference in reproductive success, we need variation, and we need that variation to be the cause of the difference in reproductive success. Okay, So those are the four conditions. And like I said, they're summed up in that one phrase: heritable variation leads to differential reproductive success. So we have heritable traits that are able to be passed on from parent to offspring. The variation is in the population to begin with, and then because of that variation, so there has to be a causal link between the variation and the outcome. Because of that variation, we're getting differential reproductive success, where some organisms with beneficial traits are able to have more offspring than or individuals with less advantageous traits. And so there's differential reproductive success, and those beneficial traits are passed on to the next generation, and then that trait will become more common, and we'll see a change in a population over time. So this sums up our lecture on natural selection, and I will see you guys soon.